Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Tiny Blue Games. My name is, of course, Csaw or Chris, and today we're playing Final Fantasy XIV in 2019. Today we're taking a look at Brayflox's Longstop. I hope that's how you say it. This is another dungeon in Final Fantasy XIV, and it's another dungeon that you end up doing if you are going through the main scenario quest. How's it going, everyone? Hopefully you're doing well. We're back to another dungeon video. It seems weird because I hadn't done like a dungeon video in a really long time, and now all of a sudden I'm doing back-to-back dungeon videos rather. And it kind of seemed that way in the main scenario quest too. I went a really long time without having to do a dungeon, and I always actually really enjoy doing the dungeons that are tied to the story, and then I was very surprised to have another one come up right away, so very cool. Just before we get into the video, I did want to ask you a bit of a question, and I think I will put a poll in this video as well. I always like to start thinking about kind of next year's content. This year, I had a big focus on trying to be a bit more consistent on YouTube, and I think for the most part I did quite well. I've been very good actually at sort of keeping the one video a week at the minimum and jumping up as required, so it's been very nice that way. My big issue that I still face, and I think I've talked about this in a few other videos before, is that it seems like I don't move very fast in games, and the main reason is that I play a lot of different games. However, I don't, show footage of me playing many of the different games I play on this channel. I tend to show other footage from other MMOs that I try and other MMOs that I play, but I don't show any of the other footage. And the way I've generally dealt with this is I've made other channels where I do put this footage. For instance, for any mobile game content that I do, I have a Tiny Blue Games mobile channel, so I just sort of put the videos there. And the main reason I do that is because I know that not everyone loves seeing every video. And to the best of my abilities, I've really tried to separate that content for you guys as much as I can. So my question that I'm asking, and it's taking me a really long time to ask this question, is would you prefer me to keep doing that? For instance, if I had footage of me playing League of Legends, or of me playing Fortnite or Apex Legends or something like that, would you prefer that I had another channel called Salty Csaw or something like that, where I put that footage? And if you were someone who was interested in that, you went there and you watched that as well? Or do you prefer just having, one channel where you see any kind of like gameplay of any kind of game, MMOs included, any other videos I ever create on YouTube? Is it better if it's all in one place? Because I know that variety channels do work eventually, and it ends up being when people care more about the actual person creating the content than the content itself. And I'm not really sure if we're at that point, or if it's still a situation where we're really in love with just the Final Fantasy content, and to a larger extent, yes, MMO content, but that's kind of where we should stop. So the poll is going to be very simple. It's going to be, no, I prefer just MMO content. If anything, I'd prefer just Final Fantasy content. That's kind of like the complete one side of it, where you like how things are right now. Number two, you're okay to it, but you would prefer it to at least be gaming content, and you'd like it to be obviously less than the other videos that are going on currently. In any of these situations, I don't plan to alter the amount of Final Fantasy videos coming out. Like I'm very confident with that once a week sort of situation, and I don't really plan to change that up. And then the third option would be that you'd be fine seeing anything I create. You love just sort of seeing what I'm up to, and you'd feel even better just kind of knowing what I spend the rest of my time doing as well on this channel, as long as I do keep up the videos that you love. So those are the three different categories. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the poll, and more to that, I'd love to hear your suggestions and stuff in the comments below. And I'm not sure how long I can keep these polls open, but keep the comments coming, and I'll definitely reference this video when I'm starting to plot out my videos for the next year, because I do plan to do kind of a overview of 2019 and talk some about the successes and something about the future as well. So there you go. I know that was a fairly large aside, and we haven't really talked about the dungeon at all that's playing in the background, but that's quite okay. So let's talk about the dungeon. The number one big thing about this dungeon is that it's outside. I don't think we've had a Final Fantasy XIV dungeon that is outside yet. I'm trying to think now. I think they've either been in caves or in caves or houses or corridors or something like that. So I think that this is the first one we're doing that's outside, and two things. It makes it feel very open, but at the same time, it really makes you aware of invisible walls, because whenever you have an instanced area that is outside, the developers have to really struggle with what they make it so you can't climb over and stuff like that, because obviously there's areas that aren't playable space, and being outside, it's more natural to have things open compared to in a house. Obviously the wall is going to be something you can't go through. Here they kind of have to make ridges and ledges and stuff that are not passable, and there's a battle between making things feel comfortable and making things feel like they are just too obstructed, and it can easily not feel great. I think Final Fantasy XIV's done a pretty good job with this, and for the game in general, I think it's a pretty good job of making things feel like you can pass over it. It's not the best MMO I've ever seen for that. It's not the worst by far, though. The worst in my mind was Guild Wars 2 back, before any of the expansions. Back when it was just vanilla Guild Wars 2, there's a lot that I liked about that game, but it definitely felt like you were locked on the ground, and there was a lot of invisible walls, and that things were very cut out and you couldn't play in certain areas, and if you did manage to get to those areas, you did it by breaking through the map and stuff like that. So that's kind of what I envision a very poor situation. A very good situation, on the other hand, would be things like Wildstar, where they just had their enhanced movement, and it really felt like you could jump on a lot of different things and really freely explore. And obviously, there was a limit to this as well, but they even encouraged it with their sort of sub-paths. They had the Explorer that allowed you to climb up different mountains and stuff like that, and rewarded you for doing that kind of thing. So I definitely enjoyed that as well. So this is a nice in-between situation, is what I'm getting at. We have me healing as well. I've really become quite comfortable healing. This dungeon, however, was once again one of the first times I felt a fair bit of pressure as a healer. There was quite a few times where I noticed the tank taking a lot of damage, and I had to very quickly react. And I hope that that's just a sign of what's to come with the dungeons becoming more difficult. Obviously, it could be a lack of gear on my side or on the tank side as well. But I definitely enjoyed having to be focused on doing healing the whole time. And because what was more enjoyable is the fact that I felt very rewarded when I healed well enough that I actually had time to toss out some damage at the same time. And that's definitely where I think that gameplay of the Scholar shines, is it makes you feel rewarded when you are good enough that you can do that. And I say good enough like I am quite impressive or something like that, and that's not the case. But it's definitely a little bit higher skill level than where I was a few dungeons ago. And even to the point where I actually ended up running out of MP. And I was like, what's happening? Why can't I use my skills? And I was like, I ran out of MP for the first time ever in Final Fantasy XIV, so I had to use my skill on my hotbar that gives me MP back, and I actually didn't know where it was, because I was like, I remember reading a skill like this, but since I've started the game, there's never been a situation where I've been out of a resource. So I'm very excited to see those kind of elements are at play in this game, and it definitely made me feel like I was playing more the same level of content I would at a higher level, like at WoW or something like that, where I am thinking about those things. Now, obviously, we're still quite a ways from endgame and what the actual full sets of abilities look like. I do realize that, but this is definitely a step in the right direction. In terms of the rest of the game, I've really been focusing on doing the main scenario quests. That's kind of all I do when I log into Final Fantasy XIV, is I go through these and I kind of go through the quests and read about them and, you know, do what the quest asks, do the dungeons and stuff like that. One of my biggest issues, I think, is I really understand making a video about these dungeons and doing them for the first time. I'm not sure how to capture footage of me doing the main scenario quest and making it interesting. Like, I'm not sure how to go about doing that. Because I find that when I'm recording myself doing the main scenario quests, unless it's a situation where I'm in an instance and I'm fighting and stuff like that, I very frequently feel like I need to start going faster and skipping through things, and that's where I'll end up skipping some dialogue and stuff like that, because it's just me, like, it's just silence on the screen, right? The alternative to that is me actually reading out the dialogue and reacting in real time, but it feels very forced to do that as well. And like it just, I don't know, it doesn't feel very natural, and that might just be because I've never done it before. So if you are someone who kind of has a vision of how I should go about treating the main scenario quests, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that in terms of actually producing content for them. I'm very okay to just not produce content and sort of talk about bigger overviews, like, you know, once I'm done the Realm Reborn story, I was gonna do a big kind of overview of what I thought of the story as well. So that's currently what I thought my plan would be, but the more we go through this and the more I realize how much story content there is, I'm starting to wonder if I should actually be, you know, more actively engaging with the story, and making videos out of it, because I'm engaging with it on my end. I'm just not showing you guys my live reaction to it, I guess, is what I'm trying to stumble out here. So any thoughts on that would be great as well. I really do want to start catering more to what you guys find interesting to watch. As a creator, it's often, you know, kind of, you just do what you feel comfortable doing. But even talking to you guys, kind of how we did several months ago when I did that very first time I did one of these dungeon videos and I just talked for the whole 20 minutes. You gave me a lot of positive feedback about not only it being interesting to see my entire reaction to the dungeon, but also that it gave you a lot more time just to hear about my random thoughts. And if anything, this video that we're doing right now has been a very clear example of that, because I've talked a little bit about the dungeon, but I get off topic and start talking about things that are on my mind and things I want to resolve as well. So it's a really nice mix that way. So we're getting to the, I want to say this is the third. Actually, it says that we're on the fourth boss, but I always thought this was the third one. This guy's pretty cool. He's like a big lizard. I often find lizards to be very freaky. I'm terrified of snakes in real life, like just terrified. So lizards are a very close second. Certainly, and it's weird because they're very similar. It's just the legs really help to make them a little bit less terrifying. But yeah, a very cool dungeon. I loved the aesthetic of it being outside. I loved seeing not only my own different skills, but I'm getting to a point now where I'm seeing other characters use different skills that I haven't seen before. Because for a long time, when I was going into duties at lower levels, I would always see the same attack skills over and over again. And it kind of got to a point where I was visually tired of watching these same classes keep attacking. So it was really, really nice to actually have a situation where I'm like, wow, that's an interesting class, or wow, that's an interesting skill. I've never seen that before. So definitely seeing a bit more of that. For instance, I think the casters, abilities look really cool, like sort of the lightning look to it. I really do enjoy that, and it makes me interested to play a caster, which we all know is good when I start getting interested in other classes. But don't worry, we're gonna get we're gonna get this main scenario quest figured out before we start drifting onto other things. This actually is also when I ended up running out of MP for a little bit, or I got really low, and a dragon spawned. I was like, oh crap, what a great time to run out of MP. But as it turns out, this is actually and you probably know this, I'm saying it like you don't, but you know that this is probably the last boss, and he'll fly away eventually, which is really cool. I think dragons are... Like, dragons and MMOs are just so closely knit together. Like, I'm crossing my fingers like a little snug finger cross right now. But it's so true. Like, you go against a dragon in a dungeon in an MMO, and that's like the perfect situation. That often reminds me of the very first dungeon you do in Wildstar was Stormtalon's Lair. And it was such a classic dungeon. It was in a cave. There was like 3 bosses. It was challenging, and the very last boss was Stormtalon, a dragon, and it was just such a classic fight. And I love it when there's classic dungeon layouts like that. And it's almost a cliche to have a dungeon in a dragon, you know, Dungeons and Dragons. But it's a fun situation because you're like, yeah, that's a true RPG flavor. And I really... It's sometimes nice to have ice cream that's vanilla or chocolate, right? Like, you're like, okay, especially when starting a game, I think that's a very good way to have your first dungeons, something very familiar. And I've talked about that before. You know, I think it's very important when you're starting a new MMO to start on a class that you are fairly familiar with as well, because it'll give you a little bit of comfort, and it'll probably make you enjoy the game a little bit more, because you'll be like, oh, this feels normal. I'm able to kind of experience some of the things I'm very comfortable with. So I definitely enjoy that as well, and I think that's a really good aspect to the game. We'll see here that a bunch of my gear is breaking, and I'll forget to fix it again. I remember the first time I ran out of, like, all my gear started breaking, and you guys like told me in like, I think at least 3 of the following videos, you were like, fix your gear. So I do know how to fix my gear. So if you're typing that comment, I do know it's probably just a lack of remembering, but I should fix my gear. I really, really should. But yeah, guys, I'd also love to hear your thoughts on the recent patch, because I know that's a very big thing when an expansion comes out. The first content cycle is such a huge part of engaging with the community and keeping people invested, because you have that first patch, or that first drop of the expansion, and then obviously a couple months afterwards the player base starts to recede. And we definitely, like, I think everyone's seen that in the game. That happens in every MMO I've played. So I'd be very interested to hear on your, you know, what are your thoughts of 5.1? Does it do enough for the people who are veterans to Final Fantasy XIV? Is it interesting for new players? Obviously, you know, I had a few tweaks to some of my abilities and stuff like that, but outside of that, I haven't seen too much, and I haven't played with too much from the patch. I watched a few videos on some of the new content that came out, and it looked really cool, but at the same time, I also knew, like, the content that came out with Shadowbringers looked really cool too, and I haven't been able to play it yet. So I feel like in a weird situation where I'd love to make videos about that content, but once again, I don't want to rush to it. So there'll always be new patches to cover. So I'm looking forward to getting to that point. And obviously you can see our friend, the friendly dragon, has returned. Very classic fight, dragon in a cave. This is what I'm talking about. This is chocolate ice cream right here. It's such a fun fight, except for, you know, our DPS. That's kind of, I didn't realize this when I was playing it, but I'm looking at him and he's like just standing there, and I'm like, okay, unless maybe he's not supposed to attack, but that doesn't seem right. But yeah, I'm gonna do some attacking anyways. It's a really fun thing to do, because and it's such a better thing than a lot of other games, certainly a lot of WoW healers, where once you've healed everyone, and it's like, if it's a low level dungeon and you don't have any damaging abilities, you start hopping around because you're so bored. Like, you're just jumping around, and it's really nice to have the option to do damage and to really help out. And that's why often play Discipline Priests on WoW or in WoW, because I do like that option to, and I mean, it's less of an option with that class, if you've ever played it, but it's definitely really nice to be able to help out, and you do notice it as a full group, like even when you're a DPS or something like that, when you have the healer doing, maybe half your damage or a quarter of your damage, it still accounts for a tremendous amount of actual overall damage, and you end up clearing through dungeons a fair bit quicker. And that's definitely the case also in Guild Wars 2, where you can have the raid healers. They're more of buffers, like they buff people up. That's almost their main category. Like if you're playing full meta, you'll notice that the damage they do is very substantial, and you'll often cut through content like at a crazy speed just because you have really good healers that in a lot of ways can do some pretty decent damage. Like it's pretty crazy. So I definitely like it when healers have that option to really engage and be a part of it. A thing that I am very aware of with being a healer is that I'm not decursing, or I haven't like looked at curing poisons or anything at all, and that's probably something I should look into. I should have a good read through some of my abilities, because I'm sure that becomes a much larger part of this game. I haven't ever considered the debuffs when healing, so definitely something I'm gonna have to look at. You've even seen me in a past dungeon, I died like instantly just because I didn't clear a debuff, so something I'm gonna have to look at. I'm just thinking about this because I'm seeing the green poison on the ground, and I'm like, I wonder if that was like a poison that I could remove. So maybe I've been talking about how much damage this dungeon does, and it could be avoidable, but we'll see. But yeah, guys, hopefully you enjoyed this video. We'll switch it up and do something different in the next video. But yeah, it's been fun to cover a couple dungeons. So thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.